I saw him walk into the studio heavy, silent, calm with that same slow, deliberate stride that once unnerved opponents before the first punch even landed. Mike Tyson. A name that still echoed like a thunderclap. In New York, he was fear, fame, and folklore all rolled into one. And that night, he wasn't just stepping into a talk show. He was stepping into something much darker. It all started innocently enough. The Daily Show had invited Mike on as a guest to talk about his new vitamin company, a clean, sanitized segment meant to nod at his unexpected evolution from champion to businessman. But behind the scenes, the producers wanted a moment. A viral clip. A spectacle. And in the control room, one host in particular had a plan that went far beyond satire. His name was Jason Marshall. Charismatic, razor-tongued, and with a smirk that made even his compliments sound like threats. To the audience, he was just another clever co-host with a flair for controversy. But to those who really knew him, Jason had a long memory and a grudge. See, Jason's uncle was Ted, the Hammer, Marshall, a heavyweight contender back in the late 80s. His career had promise, his jaw had steel, and his camp believed briefly that he could go toe-to-toe with Tyson. That belief ended 2 minutes and 32 seconds into the first round when Mike knocked Ted out cold. Not just unconscious, broken. Ted was never the same. His speech slurred. His balance off. The media moved on, but Jason never did. He was 10 years old at the time. And he remembered everything. That night, Jason wasn't just looking to interview Mike Tyson. He wanted to embarrass him. Humiliate him. Maybe even break him publicly, and live, but he also knew something else. Mike Tyson's anger was legendary. So Jason came up with a plan: provoke him. Not with obvious insults, but with subtle jabs, questions about his time in prison, his financial troubles, his moments of breakdown. And if Tyson lost control? That's where the second part of the plan kicked in. Jason had friends in the NYPD, and a few of them were already on the take, low-level officers willing to play a part in what was being sold as a prank gone too far. The idea was simple: if Mike so much as raised his voice or stood up too fast, uniformed officers would come into the studio supposedly for security reasons and arrest him on the spot. Officially, it would be for disturbing the peace or threatening behavior. But unofficially, it would be Jason's revenge. Poetic justice on live television. Now, most people on set had no idea this was in motion. They thought it was just another edgy segment, another celebrity roast. But one person did know, and he wasn't behind the camera. He was sitting in the green room, sipping tea. His name was Caleb, a former MMA coach and longtime friend of Mike's. Caleb had worked with showbiz people before, and he'd been tipped off just days earlier by an assistant producer who had grown uncomfortable with the setup. She didn't give details, just one quiet warning: they're going to try and get him to explode. And there's a police angle. Caleb told Mike everything. At first, Tyson just stared at him, still, unreadable. Then he did something unexpected. He laughed. Not a deep, booming laugh. Just a short, quiet exhale through his nose, like someone who had finally figured out the ending to a bad joke. "What do you want to do?" Caleb asked. Mike didn't answer immediately. He looked in the mirror. Pulled on his black jacket. Tightened his gloves, not boxing gloves, just the soft leather kind you wear in the city when the wind bites through the concrete. Then he smiled. A small, knowing smile. "I'm gonna give them a show," he said. "Just not the one they think." The next morning, the Daily Show set was buzzing. Producers rehearsed segments, camera ops checked angles, and Jason paced the stage, flipping through cue cards laced with venom. Everyone was excited. This was going to be the highest-rated episode of the month, maybe the year, and then exactly 1 hour before the taping a man walked into the building. He looked like Mike Tyson. Sounded like Mike Tyson. Even moved like Mike Tyson, but it wasn't Mike Tyson. It was Reggie, a professional impersonator and former Vegas stage actor who had made a living mimicking Tyson's lisp, mannerisms, and scowl. He'd been trained for this, rehearsed to answer questions just like Mike would, but with one difference: he would be easier to provoke. Just slightly more reactive. Just enough to invite conflict. As Reggie was ushered into makeup, Caleb stepped out onto the sidewalk. He pulled out his phone and made one call. "They're about to go live," he said. On the other end, a calm voice responded, "We're in position." Because Mike Tyson wasn't in the building, that he was 3 blocks away, sitting in an unmarked SUV with 2 internal affairs officers and a district judge's warrant tucked safely in his coat pocket. The real fight hadn't started yet, but it was about to. Backstage, the fake Tyson Reggie sat beneath the warm glow of a dressing room mirror, slowly chewing a stick of gum, fists on his knees. He didn't talk much. That was part of the role. Real Tyson never wasted words before a confrontation. He let the silence build tension, let others wonder what he might be thinking. Reggie had mastered the posture, the stillness, the occasional cold stare that made even seasoned producers avoid eye contact. The crew didn't suspect a thing. Out on the stage, Jason Marshall adjusted his earpiece and leaned against the guest table, bouncing slightly on his heels like a man on the edge of a personal triumph. He was wearing a charcoal suit, no tie, top button undone, casual but in control. His co-host, Ava Lynn, scrolled through her cue cards, unaware of Jason's private scheme. Ava was sharp, funny, and knew how to handle celebrities. But she didn't know this wasn't just an interview, it was a trap. 3 NYPD officers in plain clothes waited just off stage, standing near a side entrance with arms folded and glances that flicked between each other too often. These weren't the usual security team. They were part of Jason's quiet arrangement, paid overtime, a bit of cash under the table, and the promise of a harmless TV stunt. They weren't here to protect Mike Tyson, they were here to make sure he didn't leave the stage without handcuffs. Inside the SUV, 3 blocks away, the real Mike Tyson sat in silence. "You're sure they're on site?" he asked. The officer in the passenger seat, a lieutenant from Internal Affairs named Ramos, nodded. "2 of them are already on the set. We've been tracking their comms since morning. No warrant, no cause. This isn't law enforcement. It's a setup." Mike didn't blink. "Then let's clean the ring." Back at the studio, the audience had begun filing in laughter, phones out, heads craning for a glimpse of the legend. Reggie, posing as Mike, was escorted to the edge of the curtain, where Ava greeted him with a nervous smile. Even she couldn't hide the excitement. "Thanks for being here, Mike," she said. "Let's keep it light, yeah." Reggie grunted perfectly. Jason, standing just off camera, grinned wide. "Oh, I'll keep it light," he thought. Right until the moment you explode. The opening music hit. The stage lights flared. The crowd roared as Jason and Ava walked out together. "Good evening, everyone," Jason began, flashing that practiced smirk. "We've got a special one for you tonight. Former heavyweight champ, occasional earbiter, prison philosopher, and now vitamin tycoon, give it up for the one, the only Mike Tyson." The crowd stood as Reggie walked onto the stage, head down, hands swinging like pendulums. He looked tense. A little too tense. Perfectly tense. Jason reached out to shake his hand, and Reggie paused just for a half-second too long before accepting it. The crowd noticed, the tension rose. The first few minutes went as expected. Jason lobbed a few harmless questions about the new business, Tyson's newfound love for pigeons, even a mild joke about his face tattoo. Then Jason leaned forward. "So, Mike, let's talk about your time in prison." The room cooled. Ava's eyes darted sideways. "That wasn't in the pre-interview. You've said before that prison changed you. But let's be honest, some would say you've always had a temper problem. Ever worry that you might snap again?" Reggie tilted his head slowly. "Snap," he said, voice low, lisp intact. "Sure," Jason said, playing casual. "You know, like you did with Evander. Or with that reporter. Or that guy on the plane. You've had episodes, right?" The word episodes hit like a low punch. It wasn't a question. It was bait, the audience murmured. Ava shifted in her seat. Reggie clenched his fists visibly. Jason leaned in, now openly taunting. "Just saying, some people think you're still dangerous. Should we be nervous?" Reggie stood. That a gasp rippled through the crowd. Jason smiled like a man who just landed the uppercut of his career. "Whoa there, Mike," he said mockingly. No need to stand. We're all friends here. That's when the door burst open, not the stage door, the back of the studio. Real Mike Tyson walked in wearing a black hoodie, calm as the eye of a hurricane, flanked by Lieutenant Ramos and two uniformed internal affairs officers. The audience turned as one. Jason froze mid-sentence. Ava's jaw dropped. Mike's voice echoed from the aisle, slow and sharp. Jason, that ain't me. Reggie stepped back, suddenly relaxed, then pulled off the fake earpiece. The studio burst into stunned whispers. The officers moved quickly, not toward Tyson, but toward the three plainclothes cops near the curtain. They didn't even resist. The moment they saw IA badges, their shoulders slumped. Jason stood, his smile shattered. What is this? He stammered. You're not. What's happening? Mike walked slowly down the stairs toward the stage. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look angry. You tried to bait me, he said. Had your boys ready to jump me the second I raised my voice. All 'cause your uncle couldn't handle the fight he signed up for. Jason's face drained of color. That was a joke. It was a segment. Nah, Tyson said. It was a setup. And setups don't end well. Not in boxing. Not on TV. The crowd watched in complete silence. Cameras still rolling. Jason was now standing alone on the stage, sweating, shaking. The internal affairs officers escorted the crooked cops off stage. Then Ramos turned to Jason. Mr. Marshall, he said formally, you're under investigation for conspiracy to falsely arrest a civilian, abuse of influence, and collusion with law enforcement under false pretense. Jason laughed nervously. You can't be serious. This is a gag. This was supposed to be. You thought you could control the outcome, Mike said calmly. But in the ring, nobody controls the outcome but the fight. He turned toward the crowd, then looked directly into one of the cameras. This city made me, he said. But it also tried to break me. I'm still here. And I didn't need to punch anybody to prove it. The crowd erupted, not in chaos, not in panic. In stunned, rising applause. It only took 11 seconds after Mike Tyson's final line for the clip to hit the internet. A grainy screen recording from a college student in the balcony uploaded with the caption, Tyson brings the real knockout and he never threw a punch. By the time Mike stepped out the studio's rear exit, the video had already crossed 100,000 views. Within an hour, it was over 3 million. And by sunrise, the words, that ain't me, had turned into a meme, a hashtag, and a viral ringtone. Inside the building, the mood was unstable. Jason Marshall sat in a side hallway, eyes vacant, his microphone still clipped to his lapel like a man who hadn't realized the fight was over. His voice, usually confident, biting, was now reduced to short, disjointed mutters. This was supposed to be satire. It was just television. Ava Lynn, still shaken but composed, stood outside the control room in quiet conversation with one of the producers. She had no part in Jason's plan, and it was clear now she'd been blindsided, a professional dragged into a circus act dressed as journalism. Her voice was low, but firm. If you think I'm sitting next to him tomorrow night, you're out of your mind. Meanwhile, the real Tyson sat in a quiet green room down the hall. Not gloating. Not smiling. Just sipping from a paper cup of black tea, hands still steady, breathing slow. Caleb sat across from him, shaking his head in disbelief. You didn't just dodge a bullet, he said. You redirected it mid-air. Mike's reply was simple, I've already thrown my punches. This one needed stillness. The door cracked open. A studio executive peeked in, older, sweating slightly, holding his phone like it was a bomb about to go off. Mr. Tyson, we're, getting a lot of calls. I just wanted to say, from the network we had no idea Jason was planning that. None. Mike didn't even look at him. He just stood up, buttoned his jacket, and walked past him. No worries, he said. I'll let the audience decide. And oh, they did. The morning headlines weren't just headlines. They were declarations. Mike Tyson outsmarts The Daily Show. New York Post, not a fight, a masterclass, CNN, the day Tyson won without swinging, ESPN, that ain't me how a lookalike and a legend shut down a setup, Rolling Stone. Social media, of course, was even faster. Clips flooded TikTok, reaction videos exploded on YouTube. Someone remixed Reggie's fake out into a dance track. A prominent podcast host simply tweeted, "Mike Tyson just punked a room full of professionals. He didn't punch a face. He punched a narrative." But the real story wasn't online. It was inside the NYPD's Internal Affairs Division, where Jason's 3 off-duty accomplices were now facing suspensions and criminal inquiries. The paper trail was thin. Jason had been careful but not careful enough. Text messages recovered from one officer's phone showed the whole thing, coded language about the big scene, a memo about disruption protocol, even a Venmo transaction labeled extra for stage backup collision. Within 48 hours, Jason Marshall was suspended from The Daily Show. An emergency board meeting was held. PR teams scrambled. The show issued a vague statement: "We regret the events of our most recent episode and are reviewing our internal protocols. We deeply value our guests and their safety." It didn't help, because this wasn't about internal protocols anymore. It was about trust and how fast you can lose it when the cameras are still rolling. Ava Lynn went public 2 days later in an emotional appearance on another late-night show. She told her side how she had no idea what Jason was planning, how the tension had felt wrong from the start, and how watching Tyson handle it with grace made her rethink the way their platform was being used. "Mike Tyson taught us more about restraint than any of our writers," she said. And we had a room full of them. The crowd gave her a standing ovation. As for Mike, he didn't do interviews. He didn't tweet. He just went home, back to his quiet place in Catskill, where the wind off the mountains is cooler than any air-conditioned studio and the only cameras are on nature documentaries. But that didn't mean he wasn't watching. 3 days after the broadcast, he received a package. No name. No return address. Just a handwritten note inside: "You broke him. Without breaking him. Respect." There was also a photograph, an old, grainy shot of a boxing ring in 1986, mid-fight. Tyson's gloved fist was frozen just inches from a man's jaw. The man? Ted Marshall. Jason's uncle. Mike looked at the photo for a long time. Then folded the note, slid it into the back of his journal, and went out to feed his pigeons. But the story wasn't quite finished, because while Jason's world was falling apart on screen, someone else had just made a quiet call. In an office across town, a familiar figure leaned back in his chair. He was part of the network's upper management, though he rarely showed his face. He preferred shadows. Silenced, he watched the Tyson clip again, hands steepled beneath his chin. "Smart move," he muttered to himself, then he reached for the phone. "Get me the guy who played the double," he said. "Reggie. I've got a new offer for him." 2 weeks had passed since the night the crowd stood still and the trap fell apart. New York moved on, like it always does. Headlines faded. New scandals took their place. But there were a few names that stayed in the wind, whispered with either admiration, disbelief, or regret. One of them was Jason Marshall. After a brief and defensive apology on social media, "I take full responsibility for a comedy bit gone too far," Jason disappeared. Rumors spread, a nervous breakdown, a lawsuit pending, a book deal already brewing. But none of them felt real. What was real? The silence. His show was over, his seat empty, and his legacy, a lesson. No charges were filed, not against him. The officers took the legal heat. But his reputation? That had a longer sentence than any courtroom could deliver. A few tabloids caught him once at a cafe in Brooklyn. Hoodie pulled low, eyes sunken, drinking his coffee without sugar, or smirked that he didn't look like a man scheming a comeback, that he looked like a man replaying a scene he never should have written. Then there was Reggie, the impersonator. The actor. The man who spent years making a living off sounding like someone else, only to become someone in his own right. After the broadcast, Reggie's inbox exploded. Comedy writers. Podcast hosts. Agents who had once ghosted him now asked for lunch. His name was trending not just as Tyson's double, but as the guy who kept a straight face while the whole room collapsed. Within a month, he landed a recurring gig on a sketch show. A mockumentary was greenlit. There was even talk of a biopic not about Tyson, but about the night Reggie saved a legend's dignity by playing him better than anyone ever had, and Mike, he watched from a distance. No bitterness. No jealousy, just pride. One day, Reggie received a note. Plain envelope. No signature. Inside was a single sentence, handwritten in sharp black ink, "You moved like me. But you stood like yourself." Tucked behind it was a backstage pass VIP, no expiration, and Tyson, he returned to the only kind of ring he still respected, a small wooden platform in the Bronx, surrounded by kids in gloves too big for their hands and dreams even bigger. That he taught them how to move. How to breathe. How to take a hit and not let it define them. Power, he told them once, ain't in your fists. It's in your patience. They didn't fully understand. Not yet. But they would, and whenever someone brought up the Daily Show incident, and they always did, Mike would just chuckle. "I didn't win," he'd say. "They just lost the plot." There's no replay button in life. No slow-motion edits. No crowd cheering just when you need it, but sometimes if you wait long enough, and stay calm enough, the world gives you a moment. One moment.To show everyone exactly who you are. Mike Tyson took that moment. And he didn't break anyone. He didn't shout. He didn't fight. That he let the silence speak, and this time, it was louder than any punch he ever threw.